Hello and welcome to the second episode of A Place of Safety podcast. I'm Matt.
And I'm Vincenzo, thank you.
Thanks for coming back again. We were surprised, Vincenzo, weren't we, after last week's episode to discover just how international our audience was.
Yes, I was, definitely, because we are building this episode series to really speak to a British audience, mainly.
Yeah. And so where did you find that people were listening from?
Well, I found that from all over the world, people are listening to this podcast, which is really surprising.
What sort of places?
America. We had...
Wasn't there somewhere in South America?
We have South America, North America, Asia.
Chile?
We had Chile, we had Argentina, we had... we also had Spain, Japan, Thailand, United States. Anyway.
Really?
So
I didn't know there were quite that many places.
No, that's amazing. So one thing that I wanted to say the last time, but then I didn't say, was that, yes, we're concentrating on Britain merely because we live in Britain. And this is the system that we are in contact with. But, for example, I'm Italian, so I come from another system. And as I said the last time, there are many different systems in different parts of the world. So we are absolutely interested in knowing about these systems and what the experience is of either working in mental health services or support services generally, or being helped by these services all over the world. That's very important to us.
Yeah, what it's like in those countries.
And so
we can make this a bit more international.
Yeah, we're trying to... We really want to make it as international as possible. And I think that a lot of the things that we talk about are not just relevant to Britain. So they're relevant to many places in the world. Yeah. So please listen. Keep listening. Keep writing to us. apospodcast@gmail.com.
That's right.
Give us your views, your perspective. Give us advice or ask questions. That's really important to us. So we don't want just people from Britain listening.
Not that there's anything wrong with Britain.
There's nothing wrong with Britain. People from Britain, you need to listen as well.
Okay.
Because this is your system.
So let's get straight into the subject matter of the second episode, and that is risk management. Yes. We're going to be talking about risk today. Yeah,
we're talking about risk. So this continues our attempt to question things that are not really questioned in services. Last time we spoke about best practice, and this is which is unquestioned virtually, and this risk management is another concept that is basically unquestioned.
Okay, so for people that don't know what risk management is or what a risk assessment is, maybe you could just explain a bit about what that is.
Yeah, so this is a way of defining complex issues, like self-harm, like suicidality, many other complex difficulties that people have. So you're not only encouraged, but really you have to define these single issues as risks in mental health services in Britain, almost everywhere you go.
Sure. So, whether or not somebody feels suicidal or...
So that's a risk.
Yeah. What other things count as risks?
Somebody hears voices, that's a risk.
Right.
Somebody abuses or uses substances, that's a risk.
Yeah.
Or somebody is in an abusive relationship, that's a risk. Things like that. So anything that has an element that is perceived or is generally considered to be a danger, then we can, some of these issues like hearing voices, then we can discuss how much it's a danger, to what extent. When they're perceived as a danger, then you need to define them as a risk, so a danger. And there are, and so a lot of viewers will be saying, well, what's wrong with that? How can you argue with that?
Yeah, what is the problem with managing risk?
So the answer to this is complex, and that's why we have a podcast episode about it. And I think it's relevant to see that the way the risk management culture is expressed is different in different services. So the underlying principles are the same, and we're going to look into them now. But the way these principles are expressed are different. So just to make to start from the most let's say the least intrusive way that the risk management culture expresses itself is in services that I would personally, this is a definition that I've made up. Personally, I would define these services as having a soft risk management culture.
Okay, and what do you mean by that?
So this is when you have these, you have a new client, a new service user, or an old one, and you have your risk assessment document or page in the referral or whatever. And that would tell you that this person is at risk of suicide because they've expressed the desire to end their life. They're at risk of self-harm because they cut themselves or hurt themselves in many ways to cope with difficulties. They're at risk of this, that, and the other. Okay, and that's just something that in these soft risk management culture places, this is just something to be aware of. That doesn't demand a specific protocol then to assess this risk, and the management of this risk. So the risk management plan is often very vague as well, but it's about trying to reduce this behavior.
Yeah, you're saying that's the system as it
that's the system as it is.
Yeah.
So why is that an issue?
Yeah.
Nobody sees it as an issue in the system. The issue is that these complex behaviors and thoughts are complex for a reason. The reason is they're not unidimensional processes that you measure them on a scale of dangerousness, and that explains the whole phenomenon.
Sure.
So when somebody hurts themselves, cuts themselves, some people do that to cope with very difficult, intense feelings.
You're saying that is scored on a scale of dangerousness.
Yeah, you can say low risk because only once in a while this person does, and medium risk because kind of
it
happens,
more often.
But high risk, this person really does it a lot, right? So basically, and you need to reduce this behavior in some way, and
the
best way you can
you as the worker,
use the worker, use the service,
yeah,
and the best way you can reduce this behavior, then that's the way to go. Okay, so that means that you're measuring this behavior. Take self-harm for this example, but we can make this example from all of the other risks. You measure it as an element of dangerousness, self-harm, and exclusively as an element of dangerousness.
Yeah,
that if it goes away, if it doesn't happen, it's good. If it stays in place, it's bad. Right. So there is some sense of what I'm about to say in services, but just to make an example how this could go horribly wrong, if I say, okay, well, this person uses scissors to cut themselves, I'm just going to take all the scissors away, anything that this person can use to self-harm, I'm just going to make it impossible for this person to use it. That's going to limit the risk of self-harm. Because this person is not going to be able to do it anymore.
But what do they then go on
What do they then go on to do? That's the problem. Because then we're ignoring all of the other variables involved in self-harm, which is that this is a way to cope with really difficult feelings. And so that is not a completely negative thing that this person is self-harming. There's the element that this helps this person avoid far worse things.
Sure.
Because if you stop somebody from self-harming and then they end their life, then if you were thinking if you wanted to be literal about your interpretation, we did stop self-harm, so success. But then the person is dead, so that just completely means we just lost the meaning of everything. That made no sense. So,
and you don't think there's an acknowledgement at the moment within,
Well, there's an acknowledgement, for example, that you shouldn't prevent people from self-harming categorically, stopping, like taking their tools off. But there's a sense that you should work with service users to make them stop self-harm or to help them reduce self-harm. And in some cases, people are not ready to reduce their self-harm. And I think if you still say, well, but you still need to try and encourage this person, then you don't know the ramifications of this.
Yeah.
Right? This is a very simple episode. And I think I think there is a use of simplifications in our day-to-day lives. So I don't want to ban the word risk, okay? So I can say, oh, this person is really suicidal, they're at risk of suicide. I might say that, but when I'm saying that, I'm thinking, yes, okay, but this is not just the dangerousness part. They're telling me something. So it's good that they're telling me something.
Yeah.
This is something valuable.
Yeah.
It would be much worse if this person didn't say anything, right?
Yeah.
So I wouldn't want to act in a repressive way that then would dissuade this person to tell me that they feel suicidal. Or I think it was good that this person is able to talk about these things, these difficult thoughts. And a lot of people have, really.
Yeah.
So,
and isn't it the idea then that risk assessments are stigmatizing in a way because it looks at only sort of like negative elements?
Yeah, it looks
perhaps.
at dangerousness. This is an old kind of stigma attached to mental distress, to suffering, that people suffer are dangerous. Then there's no real evidence for this. But what we get, it's in these soft risk assessment, risk management cultures, is this very subtle effect of risk assessments, right? That is not immediately obvious because you think, well, I'm just trying to help this person reduce self-harm in good faith. I'm just saying, oh no, the risks are too high here. We need to admit this person to hospital because they're saying they're really suicidal.
Sure.
And you don't think of the ramifications of this because you're not encouraged to think about
what are the ramifications?
That this person says, I'm never going to say this again. If I feel this, I'm just going to end my life, for example.
Yeah.
Or this person says, I'm trying to tell you I'm really desperate about these reasons. And instead of listening to my reasons, you're just focusing on repressing a behavior, right? So the needs of the person remain unmet in this way. So this is
because it's not actually trying to understand the root cause of the suffering or of the person's story, or how they got to that place, and like actually trying to support them through that. It's just identifying one thing and like looking at how you can control that. Yeah, which maybe feeds into the accountability culture that we have, wanting to make sure that that we record everything and make sure that we done everything so that if anything did go wrong, we're not responsible for what's happened.
Yeah, and the ideal situation then that nobody's responsible, which as we talked about in the last episode, then if nobody's responsible, that means that the practice is responsible. And
it means that who's responsible?
That the practice that we're using is responsible. That the way we worked wasn't the right way of working. But that's not considered, of course, ever. But in terms of this accountability, that's where we have this other type of risk management culture, which is kind of a more hard risk management culture.
Sure.
And this is where there's...
How does that take form?
That takes form. So this is actually the first impact that I had with risk management.
Yeah.
Was with a very kind of very strict, very deep risk management culture in terms of you have to really evidence the way you're measuring your risk, and so every contact you have with a person, with a client, and this is in many services, you need to ask them a range of questions. So these questions are meant to assess the level of risk. So you need to ask, for example, do you have any thoughts to end your life? And that's not enough for suicidality, because then you need to ask if they have plans, what's the level of intent from 1 to 10.
And you've worked in services where you'd have to ask that every time you came into contact with a service.